Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on leading to return, the leader's role in return. Now, before I hand over to Mock from the Innovation Beehive, who's going to be leading the webinar today, I'm going to hand over to Sarah from Farm 491, who we're partnering with to deliver this workshop. So Sarah, hello.
Hi, Joe. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Just really wanted to quickly say thanks to Joe and Mock and Zach for doing this with us today. It's great to partner with the Innovation Beehive, as always. And if any of you on the webinar today, have a registered UK company and you want any business support through agri-tech or agri-food, please do get in touch with Farm 491. I'll send over my email address after the webinar, but please do enjoy the webinar. And I'm sure you'll learn lots of great things from Joe, Mock and Zach, and it's really exciting to have them here again. So thanks, guys. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. So everyone, today's webinar is going to be interactive. You're going to need to use the chat function. So if you locate that on Zoom now and just send a quick hello, that would be really great so that we know you can use it. We're also going to have a couple of polls over the course of this webinar. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark O'Keefe, founder of the Innovation Beehive and author of the Leader's Role in Return, the Roadmap Through Uncertainty. So Mark, over to you.
Hello, seamless move over. I know, very high tech. Well, we're all working flexibly and learning new ways to work from home. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be partnering with Farm 491 today to talk about something that we're all focusing on at the moment, whether it's in preparation or whether it's actually, full steam ahead, thinking about return as we begin to ease out of lockdown. How do we return back to work? Some of us never stopped, but how do we return back perhaps to our place of work or to new ways of working? And what is the role of a leader in doing that? Now, the Innovation Beehive was founded 11 years ago. We're the people innovation experts, and we exist to release the energy and the potential of people at work. And leaders in this return post-COVID-19 will need to release the energy and potential of their people to help them face the next normal, the new normals, the now normals, all these different phrases that are being used at the moment. And today we're going to talk a little bit around some hints and some tips and some ideas around how we might be able to do that. So we normally at the Innovation Beehive talk about disruption with a big D. We normally do it in the context of Clayton Christensen and the Innovator's Dilemma, and entrepreneurs all know about disruption and the impact of AI and machine learning, Internet of Things. And that's often where we play in this space, looking at how we can use innovation to create tomorrow, to say hello to tomorrow and create what currently doesn't exist, to deliver better services, better margins, better products, better produce. And what we're dealing with now, though, is rather than disruption with a big D, is massive disruption, but with a small d. It has impacted everyone across the world. No matter what you do, whether you work in agri-tech, whether you work in retail, whether you work in hospitality, whether you work in media, everyone across the world, regardless of who they are or what role they do, has been impacted by COVID-19. Now, we know globally we're at different stages within that, but within the UK, we first had our messages about stay at home and then moving to stay alert. We saw our streets empty. We saw us all being advised to work from home, and then we're advised to stay at home. We found new ways of working, and the share price of Zoom has massively increased as a result. And we certainly discovered Teams functionality and a whole load of Microsoft 365 Office suite tools that we didn't know existed before. But it has had a massive interrupt. Government policy on saying stay home and the lockdown has had a massive impact on the economy. Now, interestingly, I was at the CIPD Festival of Work opening session this morning, and I had an economist saying, we're not necessarily in a recession. Well, it's wrong to call it a recession. What we're actually in is a turn down. We're having a turn down because of the impact of government policy. And therefore, he suspects that we'll actually move quite sharply into a V-shaped recovery. But one thing we are all doing is we are all learning about graphs, we're all learning about curves, we're all learning about letters, we're all learning about different phases and the impact of R, availability of coronavirus testing, up to 200,000 people a day, I think, is a target at the moment. We're all learning about different pieces of data, and as leaders and as entrepreneurs, it's quite difficult to understand how do you take a piece of data, interpret it appropriately and act upon it. And part of what we want to cover off on today is to help you do that. Now, one of the things that we were doing before COVID-19 hit, actually, is for about 18 months, we were doing a piece of research at the Innovation Beehive about disruption with both a capital and a small d. We were talking to leaders across many, many different industries and many different organizations globally around how they were coping with disruption. We talked to them about how did they cope and put their business and their people, their organization, their markets back together post the financial crash in 2008. And more recently, how are they coping with the impact of disruption with a big D, so technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of those things that are helping people to really change business models. And they shared with us some of the practices that they were doing, but they also shared with us some of the phases that they have gone through whilst managing this disruption and managing change and crisis. And then we started looking back further in history at other economic crashes and other wide-scale economic impacts or massive changes to the way we worked. And we realized there is a path, there is a way of codifying the phases that disruption takes and the phases that the pandemic is likely to take. Now, we all first moved into the first stage, which I hope you can see there, which is around stabilize. That was actually all of us just saying, what's happening? What is going on? A couple of questions that we needed to ask there was literally understand what is happening. I remember on February the 14th being in Brighton, visiting a client's venue and using some hand sanitations and hearing that there was coronavirus in Brighton, but still going into an arcade on the pier, touching everything, getting some donuts, putting money in the shove penny, didn't really know what was happening. Little did I know that 6 weeks later, I'd be locked down and working from home. As we started to move through the stabilize phase, organizations and businesses started to ask themselves, how do I continue to operate my business while this is happening? And people had to pivot and change. Local pubs, one of the pubs in Slad has gone into becoming a village shop, take away all sorts of things people were doing to pivot. We've delivered our programs that normally are face-to-face or our innovation consulting projects that might be face-to-face, using new technology and just flip them online. So how do you continue to operate, albeit at a reduced revenue, at a reduced rate, in this disruptive time? And there were a couple of skills and behaviors that we needed at that phase. Process management, absolutely mapping out, understanding the processes of what you do and what the phases might be of implementation of your action plans. Looking at IT solutions, gosh, didn't we quickly get onto Zoom and Teams and learn how to communicate, and Skype suddenly came back into fashion. Lots of financial modeling, looking at our run rate, looking at how we could afford things and when we could do some more financial planning. And there were a lot of HR and legal implications. You all learned the word furlough and understanding what it might mean for our business. How we could potentially access some job retention scheme money, or potentially some of the business interruption loans. Once we moved out of stabilize and went firmly into lockdown, we went into sustain phase. And some clients and some organizations are actually still in this phase at the moment. And this sustain phase is around, how do I keep working? Now I know what's happening. How do I keep working throughout this? How do I work together with my teams? What new problems are we coming up against on a daily basis? And what skills do we need to be able to overcome those problems? We've seen time and time again over the last few weeks that the skills from the toolbox of the innovator and the entrepreneur have been needed right across the entire organization, whether you are a CEO or whether you're a frontline member of staff dealing with a member of the public. You will have challenges, unknowns on a daily basis, and you'll have to use the skills of agility, creative problem solving, to try and come up with solutions to either solve it there in immediacy or to feed it back up to the organization so they can have some more strategic conversations. But actually what we're all trying to do is overcome the challenges of unknowns that we cannot predict. And we talk about moving into the next normal because this normality isn't linear. You'll be dealing with a normality that is now, and then either government advice will change, there'll be a second peak, there might be an impact of European or government policy or funding, or something happens with the Federation of Small Businesses, or whatever it might be. All of those things will impact on us as entrepreneurs, and we will have to agilely adapt to it. So we might set ourselves up to our phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 planning, but once we're in phase 2, a new piece of information, a new piece of data arrives, and our phase 2 has to be completely reevaluated. We're now moving closer into return, which is around how can you start getting back to work, perhaps operating not necessarily in the same way that you operated before, and we'll cover that in a moment, but actually what do my customers need now as we start to return back to work and start operating perhaps at a high performance level? How do we understand what our customers need, and how can we then make sure we're building products and services that are of use to them in this new normal? How can I put together my supply chain, or how can I help my organizations that I work with as they start to put together their supply chain? I know that'll be important to a lot of people on this call this morning. And then what structure, what resources, what do I need in my organization to deliver on the expectations of my customers now, and to help support my supply chain and my client's supply chain? Once we move through that return phase, we'll need to be using things like understanding, again, tools from the innovator and the entrepreneur's toolkit, trying to get in the mindset of our customers. For that, you need to have real empathy in what's happening in their world, to gather insight about what's important to them, to look at whether or not you can pivot and change the business model that you've been running on the last couple of weeks, or whether that is sustainable going forward. Looking at your structure and calling upon the HR management to understand whether there are legal implications about the new structures and resources you want to put in place. But then bringing that team back together, trying to create a sense of cohesion when you might be working, some of you working from home, some of you still working back in the organization, but also taking time to recognize and pause what's happened before you then face the organization, your team and your colleagues forward into the last stage of the pandemic, which is renew, where you start to say, how can I refresh the collective spirit of my team? And how can I manage the digital capability and the skills that we've learned during lockdown, and actually leverage those to give us a competitive advantage in the future? So as we move through those 4 stages, each of us said will have different questions, different skills, and different behaviors. But I'm just interested, thinking about you on the call, we're going to do a little bit of a poll. Joe said you were going to have some interaction here, a very simple poll to ease you in, thinking about where you might be on the roadmap in your organization now. Do you believe that you're in stabilize? Do you think you're in sustain? Do you think that you're in return? Or do you think you're in renew? So I'll give you a couple of moments just to fill those in. That would be great. And then we'll share. And I think the thing is, we may actually all be at different phases, or we all may be in the same phase. We'll find out that in a moment. But I guess what's interesting is that the levels of speed that we took to get here will be different, and how quickly we might move into renew will be different for us as well. The main thing to realize and to accept is this isn't linear. There is new information, new normals, and new unknowns we have to deal with on a daily and a weekly basis. So it's not linear, and it is to some extent circular. So I think you've had almost everyone vote. You've had everyone vote. That's fantastic. So can we share the poll?
We can,
Joe?
there you go.
So interesting results there. What you can see is 40% of us are in the sustain phase. So that is about working through the challenges at the moment, unlocking and unsolving all the problems that you're up against, and how do you continue to explore opportunities? How do you maintain and sustain some business, albeit with a reduced revenue and income during this period? And then more percentage, 60% of people moving into return, thinking about the unlocking of lockdown and moving back into work, and all the challenges of how we do that safely, both for our employees, for ourselves, and for our customers as well.
And as you said, Mark, it's not necessarily linear. And it's also not like a point in time where you can say definitively I've moved from sustain to return, is it? It is a sort of, it's a gradual thing, and it's almost instinctive and intuitive.
It is. And I think you know, this model is only helpful really to help codify and to start thinking about what questions, skills, and to some extent what emotions you might feel at each stage. It's not that you are out of return and into renew. It's not that you're out of sustain and into return. Actually, you're right. It's this is an artificial construct to help us make some sense of what is actually quite nebulous and quite soupy. Yeah. Super. So thinking about return, there'll be a number of different things that we'll have to deal with as leaders and entrepreneurs in our business. I'll talk to you a little bit in a moment about what people said to us, what we're hearing out there in the marketplace, talking to CEOs and chief people officers and chief operating officers and other entrepreneurs, what they're struggling with and some of the things they're coming up against as they move into return. But I'd just like to understand from you, in terms of returning into the next normal, again, knowing it's not linear, what sort of concerns do you have about it? What sort of things do you think you might have to come up against? Some of the challenges. I'd love you to maybe pop that into the chat function there if you can. What challenges or what concerns do you have about returning to the next normal? I've got one coming already. Thank you very much for that. Someone said it's about keeping people motivated. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, if you think about it, if you haven't been furloughed, if you're a member of a team that hasn't been furloughed throughout all this time, and you've been working, you may well have actually worked longer hours and have more stress and more changes and more things put upon you than you might have done in your normal working week. And so you, to some extent, carried the enterprise through this. And then suddenly people come back to work and you're up on the second tier of that hill and you're climbing even steeper as you move into the next phase of the next normal. So people will get tired. People's resilience, if they've been working over the entire period of lockdown, will be challenged as well. Also, those individuals who have been on furlough or maybe even flexi furlough as we move forward into July will need some time to step up a gear. They'll need to move from their Netflix or homeschooling focus to actually getting back to work. So there'll be an element of when they come back, their resilience, their motivation might take a dip as well. We've got a comment here as well, helping people feel safe. They all have different risk levels, absolutely, whether it's a safe work office environment, whether it's safety in terms of people traveling to work, whether it's safety, in fact, you know, meeting customers, going out there in the community and interacting with people. How do you keep people safe? How do you make sure that your duty of care in terms of your employees also is maintained, not only just when they're at work, but when they're traveling to and when they're leaving work, and also thinking about all of the people they interact with in terms of their stakeholders, their family members as well. How comfortable and how safe do they feel about their loved one returning to work? We've got a comment there about understanding their new working patterns. Yes, absolutely. So there will be different ways of working. There may be pressures where people want to come back to work but aren't able to because maybe the schools aren't open. You may have to look at different ways of working in different cohorts. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And people may be bolder in asking for flexi time and flexible working hours. How do you deal with those requests fairly? Absolutely. People realize you can work effectively from home. Some people have reported they're actually far more productive working from home. And there may be more requests coming in to work from home, which has implications for us in terms of the offices that we use and how you build a team where you have a number of people who aren't physically present in your enterprise. There's even talk and whispering on the grapevine about enshrining in law the rights to ask for flexi time as well. And then challenging the status quo, not being afraid to revert back to old behaviors. I think that's really interesting. I was having a conversation with a leadership team for a very well-known international brand this week. We were talking about how people potentially, when you start going back to work, slipping into old behaviors, how they've worked much more like a matrix structure over the last couple of months, been much more agile. They've made quicker decisions. But as you start to move back to some semblance as business as usual, how you start going back into that hierarchy, how you have to start covering off stakeholders and things start getting slower and slower, and the agility and the speed with which you were able to move during COVID-19 actually will start to disappear as you go back to business as usual. And then finally, another comment here, I'll say someone talked about the potential conflict between those who were furloughed and those who remained in work, keeping the business going. I think there might be an element of that, actually. We're hearing sort of whispers of those people who've said, you know, on the aside, you've had a holiday over the summer and I've kept the wheels on the bus here. Other people feeling, well, you know, I've been a bit lost over the summer. I've not really had a sense of motivation or direction. You've been fortunate. The organization favored you more by keeping you on. All those sorts of conversations may rear their head in the organization. So, one thing we have observed is leaders have had a real duality of leadership role over the last few weeks, or certainly over the last few months. And in Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, he talked about a chap called James Stockdale. And he referred to what he called the Stockdale Paradox. And the Stockdale Paradox, I think, has been observed and been experienced very clearly by leaders over the last few months. Now, James Stockdale was a prisoner of war in a Vietnamese war camp during the Vietnam War. He suffered unspeakable brutality and cruelty during that period of time, but he survived it. He survived it, actually came out, was decorated with military honors, and actually at one point stood to be the Vice President of the United States. Now, he was asked for his advice. He was asked, how did you get through that? How did you manage to keep your motivation and keep yourself facing forward when you're in a Vietnam prisoner of war camp and suffering such horrible experiences? And his advice to people when they're experiencing terribly difficult times, really under pressure and incredibly stressed, he said, you have to have faith that you'll prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time, must confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever that might be. And that duality, that paradox of having to be honest and open about the state of the organization now, the state of the economic downturn, the state of the business where people potentially might be laid off or people are being furloughed, and the lack of economic activity or the lack of investment coming on board from investors or investors pulling out investment in businesses. Balancing that with trying to inspire people, to take people with you through the 4 stages of the pandemic, and to paint a picture of what might be possible in a post-COVID-19 world. Leaders have had to sit in the middle of that and really hold that duality and that paradox. And that's exhausting. You're having to think about the now, you're having to respond, you're having to think about the future, all of those things coming together, and personal motivation coming in that as well, responding to those brutal facts. So that has been a real challenge for leaders. We've seen it time and time again. We started to call it the COVID-19 paradox, dealing with the here and now and the honesty, whilst also inspiring and trying to take people with you to a future that really is still quite unknown. So how do you go about doing that? And essentially, how do you go about making decisions and taking people with you as you are confronted with different ways of information, new information, and continually changing next normals? Well, at the Innovation Beehive, we passionately believe in the power of stimulus. We believe that somewhere out there in a parallel or a related world, somebody has solved your business problem. And if you're able to take inspiration from that parallel world, then you're able to understand the principles of what's been successful there and then apply them back to your business. And for COVID-19, we think there's a lot to be learned from the dogfighters of World War II. This parallel world shows that those fighters in airplanes that practiced the OODA loop were statistically more likely to survive in battle than those that didn't. And the OODA loop stands for observe, orientate, decide, and act. And as those pilots had to make sense of new information every time they went to the skies to fight the foe, so leaders have to make sense of new information every time new data emerges and a decision had to be made. So let me walk you through the OODA loop. Firstly, as a leader, you'll receive a set of data. You have to observe this set of data, understand and interrogate whether it is the latest set of data. If it is the latest set of data, you have to understand what has moved since the last time I saw this data set, and I was required to make a decision based upon this data set. Then, once you've done that, you need to orientate where you are in the 4 stages of the pandemic and the roadmap to uncertainty, to understand where you are in that. And then also be conscious of any lens or any unconscious bias or any emotional bias that becomes the way through which you look at this information and may actually force you to interpret it in an incorrect manner. By having consciousness of your emotional state, where you are in the roadmap through uncertainty, and any biases that might influence your interpretation of the data, you're able to come to the data completely clean and understand what has changed, and therefore decide what you need to do now, and then issue instructions and act upon the data, knowing that you may make this decision on a Monday morning, but new data may emerge on Tuesday morning, and you may have to go round that loop again to either confirm that your decision on Monday is correct, or a new decision has to be made. Now, leaders want to take people with them on this journey. You don't want to look like you're changing your mind every 5 minutes, because it means that you'll build a lack of trust. People won't feel comfortable with your decisions. And whilst people are feeling very uncertain at the moment, it will also add to their feelings of uncertainty and anxiety. So our recommendation is, if you decide to practice the OODA loop, share it with your people, share it with your investors, share it with your colleagues, share it with the community, explain how you'll be making decisions, and be really transparent about going around that loop to help people understand the reasons behind and the process to which you achieved your decision, so that they will then understand when you have to change that decision and issue a new instruction, how you got to it. So as we start to think about moving through to return and help navigate return, we talked a little bit there around the OODA loop as an overarching way of helping us make decisions. We also think there are probably some key areas that we're hearing from our clients around how they go about prioritizing what they'll focus on when they return. And it may be helpful to start thinking about these buckets. One priority was around safety. Two is around customers' expectations, what the customer needs now, and how we can create an organization that now is delivering upon customers' current expectations. Three, the financial state of the organization, the run rate of the organization, or the margins are compromised as a result of this new potential business model. Be rest assured, the plan that you had for 2020 is over. You will not revert to that plan. You cannot play catch up. You'll have to think about the new normal and what your new financial plan will be then. Fourth element, well-being, looking after the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of your people and yourself, and potentially your customers. Remember when we all used to fly and we had those safety announcements about putting your safety mask on first? Don't forget that during COVID-19. And fifth, around communicating, fleshing out with people what their problems are, what their concerns are, and communicating to clients and investors as you start to move back to work. So we're interested to understand a little bit from you in a poll, and we're going to put one up on the screen here now. What is your priority? As you start to think about return, and you can do up to 2 choices. Are you thinking about communication and finance? Are you thinking about customer and finance? Are you thinking about safety and communication? What 2 areas first jump out at you as your priority areas as you think about returning to work? I'll take a couple of moments. I feel like something in the Eurovision Song Contest. I can see the results of the agri-tech jury coming in at the moment, which is great. And nearly everyone's voted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll give them a couple more seconds.
Oh, that's it.
I think not everyone has voted twice, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, remember you got 2 choices, and
and also there's a choice there that says something else. So if there's something that's not there, safety, customer, financial, well-being, or communication, if there's something that you're dealing with or having to think about that isn't there on that poll, please pop it in the chat box. We'd love to hear if there's something else that you're focusing on as you start to navigate your way through to return.
Cool. Everyone's pretty much done. So I'll share those results. It's pretty balanced. Really,
yeah, quite balanced, as we expect, and as we've heard, to a lot of different organisations, safety is really where people are focusing. If you think about one of our big clients is McDonald's. They're talking a lot about keeping their people safe as their number 1 priority, so they can then keep their customers safe as well. And if you're thinking about brand and reputation and trust scores, what we're hearing more and more is customers and investors, when they're looking at an organization now, their trust is based on how safe are you keeping your people first, and then also how safe are you keeping your customers. Now, it may be, an organization like McDonald's was all about speed. We had a whole program last year which is about the need for speed at drive-thru over the summer. Now, we queued for 90 minutes last Thursday to get quarter pounder with cheese meals because we're loyal servants of our clients. But, the thoughts about queuing for more than 2 minutes in the past would have filled most McDonald's customers with horror. But we were wanting to make sure that we were observing whether people were keeping social distancing when they were serving us. We were observing whether the cars were safe. But the cars are safe as they're queuing on the road. Safety, absolutely, is a focus where people are. Second is the customer. You don't have a business unless you understand what your customer wants. Absolutely. Getting in the mindset of what customers' expectations are now. Looking at your finance, you don't have a business unless you have a run rate there. Well-being. You know, what's interesting around well-being is actually, there's always been what I would call a well-being industry. There's always been an element, you know, my background as an ex-HR director, there was always well-being as part of our strategy. But those more soft around the edges elements of well-being, things like assistance programs or, you know, discount membership of gyms or those sorts of things, they've come much more into the forefront. And well-being actually is far more part of the conversation now. And well-being is almost being reframed from you get a discount to go to a yoga class around what do I want for my life? How much work-life balance do I expect? My well-being, is my well-being being suited by being on the road 4 days a week and traveling, by having a 2-hour commute to work, by sitting in endless Zoom call meetings? The debate around well-being for ourselves and for our people is definitely broadening.
I think that well-being when it comes to entrepreneurs and sort of innovators and people who run small businesses that are almost starting out, as many members of Farm 491 are, you know, there's also a broader challenge there about how do you, as the owner, operator of a small business, I mean, I'm talking about you as much as anyone else here, Mark, how do you actually take the time you need to actually look after yourself as well?
I think there's a piece around not being guilty, if I'm really honest. So I think accept that, you know, running a small business, being an entrepreneur at the best of times is incredibly stressful. We've run a number of well-being programs or well-being conversations with clients over the last couple of months. And part of me has often thought in the back of my head, just between us friends, no one's running a well-being course for me. I'm having to figure out my own well-being. Now, actually what I'm doing is using our client work to reflect and be conscious of my own well-being. I think the first thing is accept that it's stressful being an entrepreneur anyway. So it's kind of stress on steroids usually. But within that, not being guilty or feeling ashamed to say, I'm having a bit of a bad time, or I'm a bit unsure about the future, or I just need to take a few hours out here. Your business will not collapse because you need to take 2 hours out, or you need to go for a run, or you need to just go and have a lie down for an hour throughout the day. It is about taking care of yourself so you can take care of your business, so your business can take care of your customers. And when we were doing our work on disruption before COVID-19, we looked at research around well-being, and we found that over 70% of senior leaders in organizations had some form of well-being practice, whether that was running or yoga or mindfulness. And there's more and more free online stuff around well-being at the moment. So just explore it and give yourself permission to not be okay as well. So thinking around how you make decisions and how you start to move towards making movements towards return. Another behavior that we think will really help, and you as entrepreneurs will recognize this behavior, is what we call startup leadership. You know, we've heard a lot about, you know, move fast and break things, or fail fast and learn, all those sorts of things. But the original seminal piece of work, the Lean Startup, done by Eric Ries, identified what large organizations do so badly and what small entrepreneurs like us do so well. They rapidly build a prototype, they build an idea, they put something out in the world, they test it with their end user to see whether what works, to see what doesn't work, most importantly, to see what doesn't work. They learn all the glitches, all the problems, all the things that don't meet their end users' requirements. And then they iterate on their idea and they build a second version, and then they put that out again in the marketplace to test. Now, as leaders, whether it's running a small business or whether it's running a large organization, this startup leadership is absolutely essential to returning successfully post-COVID-19, because you will not have all of the answers 100% of the time right first time. Over the course of the pandemic, we've all had to try out new things very publicly. We've had to, maybe we've run webinars that no one attended. Maybe we put out white papers that no one read. Maybe we put an investor pitch together. We didn't get the amount of investors we expected, or we got no investment. We've all been trying our different ways to keep our business going. And we've perhaps been a bit more public and less private around putting stuff out there and trying to move at pace through this pandemic. We've learned startup leadership very publicly. And we will need to keep hold of that build, test, learn, startup leadership approach as we move through return and into renew, because we won't get it right the first time, and that's okay. What we have to do, and as entrepreneurs we're quite used to this, is move at pace. You can't just hold on to your little darling. You have to kill your idea. You have to learn what doesn't work, build a new version, test it, and carry on. So as we then start to think about navigating return, there are a number of things we'll need to deal with. And it's helpful, again, because there are so many individual to each organization things you'll need to deal with. And there are generic things right across all organizations that we need to deal with. But there's so many, I think it's helpful to try and codify them and put some process and structure around them. So just as a kind of a first aspect, I said there are two main buckets that you need to think about as you start to think about return. There's the practical side of return, and there's the cultural side of return. So as it is tempting to start getting into a list of all the things that we need to do, all the activities we need to do, sending off millions of emails, setting things up in different ways, bang, 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 bang. But I would say one of the things that we've learned and that we've really been skilled at throughout COVID-19 is those little moments of humanity and authentic connection. You know, whether it's thanking key workers on a Thursday, whether it's about raising many millions of pounds for the NHS, whether it's about care workers staying in tents in the garden of the care homes so they could look after people and self-isolate with their patients, whether it's dropping notes through your neighbour's door saying, I know you're self-isolating, can I help you? We have had structures, we have had processes, we have had rituals, and we have had recognition. But they've been very human, and they've been authentic, but they've also been practical. And my plea is that we keep that practicality of human connection as we return through COVID-19 and to return and then into renew. So I'm interested to ask, and perhaps in the chat function here, around what sort of things that you think you'll be focusing on as you start to return, whether there are some practical or some cultural elements that you'll be focusing on as you start to return from COVID-19. We've identified a number of factors that we think will be important and that we're talking to our clients are important. And as I go through these, if you could share any more that you're experiencing or that you believe you will experience as well. So in terms of pure play practical elements that people are experiencing as they start to go through the return phase to work, well, looking at our poll earlier on, absolutely, safety is a #1 priority. It's whether or not people feel safe on their journey to work, whether or not they feel safe when they get to work, and when they feel safe when they're leaving work. The mental pressure, the mental uncertainty around coming into work, and whether or not I will be safe at work is huge for people. And we have a duty of care to make sure that our customers and our community and anyone else who works alongside us is safe at work. There will be some implications around PPE, absolutely. Then also our working hours. Someone mentioned that on the chat already. The way that we work, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, is probably alien to most of us as entrepreneurs on this call here. But definitely we'll be working with suppliers and entrepreneurs, and investors who'll be working in different ways. They'll be working different hours. We're talking to clients who are saying that we will have people coming in shifts, starting at 9, starting at 11, starting at 1, so they can manage space in reception, they can manage space in corridors. We're talking to organizations who are setting up cohorts. So maybe part of the office works on a Monday, then they work on a Wednesday and a Friday, but then Tuesday and Thursday they work from home. And another half of the team go in on Tuesday and Thursday, making sure that they build in business continuity if someone in that team becomes sick, and then that whole team has to isolate. And also looking at extended hours. Again, nothing new for entrepreneurs, having to work extended hours. Maybe your well-being, it shouldn't be on 24/7. However, people saying, I'll go in at 7 and finish at 2. I might go in but the working day extending into the evening as well. And also possibly looking over Monday to Friday, not working patterns anymore, moving into Saturday and potentially even moving into Sunday. So the practical element of keeping people safe at work and then looking at how you actually go about managing hours of people work, that's something we all have to think about. And whether we're as an organization or whether we're a small entrepreneur, you're running your own business, and maybe it's just the business of you, bet your life, your clients, your customers, and many of your stakeholders will be going through these challenges. We'll be trying to work, we'll be working differently, we'll be working extended hours, and having empathy, understanding what they're doing, and being able to respond to it will put you in a better place to be able to service to them as the opportunities emerge post-COVID-19. I've already talked about the travel to work. Lots of people are talking about cycling into work, making sure that there's somewhere actually to put their bikes, being aware of when people are coming to have meetings with you, that they're adequately protected with PPE, making sure that you appear that you are adequately protected and keeping yourself safe so that you keep investors or clients or your colleagues safe as well. And we're members of the Growth Hub, Farm 491 Community Centre at the Allen Centre over the RAU. We love the big open communal space there. This is a huge open communal space at Airbnb in London. It's called the Village Green, and we run many events there in the evenings and breakfast for our clients as well. Organizations, that whole innovation space where people naturally collide and innovation happens, part of the mantra that we've been teaching over the last couple of years, that's just not possible in the immediacy of a post-COVID-19 world. Having to look at physical space density, having to look at social distancing, having to make the best use of the office space that you have. We feel that those communal spaces, those breakout areas will become compromised and will have to be filled with desks. But how do you carry on having conversations and having those socially distanced water cooler conversations that lead to innovation and are the lifeblood of us entrepreneurs?
I think as well on the subject of space, there's also a question around other kinds of space as well. So, workshop spaces or lab spaces, and how do you keep on doing the tasks that need to be done? So one of our clients, I was chatting to her at the beginning of lockdown, and when China was in deep lockdown, and they've got a lab in the middle of the quarantine area, and they had to get special permission from the government to actually have people go into the lab because everybody was on lockdown.
They were assessed as key workers.
They were. I mean, I don't think they were calling it that in China, but they were given permission to go in, because if they didn't, they would lose literally millions of pounds worth of research. And they were a medical company, and if they'd lost that, that would have actually had a negative impact on the ability to fight this in future pandemics. And for the work that we all do as sort of agri-tech entrepreneurs, there's going to be a variety of spaces that people are working in. And the key thing, I think, is to tie in this thinking creatively about how you use your space with how you keep people safe in that space.
Yeah, great. And then, we'll all have our reception areas, whether we're going into other buildings or whether we're going into our own building or our communal building, wherever we work, or whether clients are coming to see us. We will be working in and going through redesigned reception areas, repurposed reception areas to make sure that, people are keeping socially distanced, potentially having your temperature taken as you walk through a reception area. There is as well as the physical side of that, there is a mental side, there's an anxiety side, there's an additional stress side to that. And that will impact potentially on your meetings, going in, having your temperature taken, thinking through all the implications, raising your blood pressure, your heart pressure, then sitting down and trying to have a delicate negotiation with an investor or a supplier. You'll have to take a moment and have stop before you're able to do that, and be aware and conscious that that might be coming. And that moves us on then to start thinking about some of the cultural implications that we'll have to deal with as we move through into return and then into renew, the final phase of the pandemic. And I think the first stage is about just pausing for a moment and about really recognizing what's happened. It's about saying, as individuals, what have I learned over the last couple of months? What have I done differently? How have I remained resilient? What new ideas did I put forward? How did I try and pivot something? And really give yourself a bit of recognition, a bit of pat on the back for yourself as an entrepreneur of how you kept going throughout this time to get to the point where you are returning back into a business. It's also, if you work with a team or you work with an extended stakeholder group, recognizing and celebrating what they did over the period of COVID-19. And maybe looking to see if there's any new learnings, new ways of working, new behaviors, or new skills that you can then codify and bring back into your new way of working in the post-COVID-19 world. The second element now, we've already talked about it a little bit, is around different working patterns. Being really aware that as people start to work differently, and you'll find that some people might be in an office environment, some people might be a home environment, some people might be a work near home environment. How do you carry on communicating and effectively bringing people together and having those collaborative conversations when people are working different shifts, different patterns over different days, and some are physically together and some are connecting over technology? And that real challenge of keeping people together and keeping the communication going and making sure that we are fully representative, that people feel included in the conversation and aren't just tacitly included in perhaps some of the old ways where technology, if you dialed into a conference, you were always second best. How do we make sure that all opinions and all diversity is represented as we move forward into return using technology to keep communicating? And one way to do this is to start thinking about both your customer journey again, looking at the emotional experience that you want your customers to experience as they go through your new business model, or start to come back to you as you open up your business again. But also any support staff, anyone who works with you, any of your broader stakeholders, mapping their experience, whether it's your employee journey, your investors journey, or your wider stakeholder journey, thinking about the moments of truth, breaking down each of their interactions with you as a brand, and starting to think about, how do I want them to feel? How do I get them into this phase? And how do I move them through into the next phase, ultimately to the end point I want, whether that's a successful working day, or whether that's a successful investment, whether it's a successful sale. The key thing is to have a conversation, whether it's with yourself or whether it's with your mentor or your community, around what is it that we want to achieve? How do we take stock of all of the changes that are happening on a practical level, being aware of how that might impact on a cultural, an emotional, and a mental level, and then agreeing together, contracting together how you want to work and how you'll go about assessing whether it's working, and giving yourself permission to go round that OODA loop again and say, we tried something here, this isn't working for us, let's look at the new set of data and make sure it works for us going forward. Because we will need new skills and we'll need to behave differently as we go back through and return to work. Now, before I start talking a little bit around the skills that we'll need, I'm interested, does anyone else have any priorities, whether they are cultural or practical, that they think they'll have to deal with, or they have currently on their list, or something we didn't mention, that we didn't hear from our clients, we're not dealing with ourselves? Anything that you could mention in the chat there, or have we been, as far as we know so far, fully exhausted? So I'll give you a couple of minutes if anything comes in there on the chat.
There's one thing that I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks, and that's how to kind of connect with customers in a meaningful way, as we still operate in a virtual world. And then, at what point do I then feel comfortable to come back to face-to-face contact with customers? And I know a lot of people in Farm 491 are thinking about their relationship with investors as well, and how do you get creative about actually having those meaningful interactions? So I guess that kind of sits in the cultural piece to an extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that about thinking about the moments of truth that you used to have, the moments of truth in the technology that enables you in the short term, knowing that your short term will change. I don't think that people will be comfortable forever only having Zoom conversations and only having, Teams conversations or over Skype. But I think they'll be far more blended. But you'll have to think about your industry and your investors, and how keen they will be to have that face-to-face piece. I think there is definitely, we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute, around kind of new skills. There's definitely something about operating in the new kind of distance, no-touch economy. So, we've talked to pharmaceutical reps who spent their whole life going into doctors' surgeries in America and selling new drugs and having relationships face-to-face with that doctor who has their own budget. Doctors do not have time to sales reps at the moment. Okay, let's be honest, for one thing. Just don't have time. And also, it's not safe for people to be going into places where people are ill and potentially have COVID-19 or other illnesses. So they're really restrictive on the amount of people they can actually move into those GP services at the moment. But as a pharmaceutical rep, you are the person who you spent your whole life building relationships and selling face-to-face. How do you make those sales and get your foot in the door in that new distance economy? So thinking about the new skills that we'll need, we've identified 3 main areas that we believe are vital to capitalize on the lessons from COVID-19 and to help people thrive as we move through return and into renew. And the first is innovation. It won't be anything new or surprising to the entrepreneurs on this WebEx, but over the last couple of months, more and more people and organizations have borrowed from the toolkit of the innovator. They've had to be more agile. They've had to move flight of foot. They've had to make quick decisions. They've had to reassess those decisions and readjust and iterate in the way agile working works at its best, having a clear sense of direction, making sure you put something out there, test it, experiment, and learn from it. We've also built some great digital capability in our businesses and in ourselves. There's a thing on Facebook at the moment. What drove your digital transformation? Was it the chief information officer? Was it the chief executive officer? Or was it COVID-19? And everyone just circles COVID-19. That is what's driven our digital change in organizations. Don't let us lose that ability to connect digitally and build that capability into our business plans and way of working going forward. The second bit, because we're having to deal with so many next normals and so many different changing factors, really getting strong interpersonal skills, getting empathy to understand what's going on in our customers' world, in our investors' world, and in our employees' world, to really see things from their point of view. Understanding from an emotional intelligence point of view how I communicate with people, how I pick up on the best ways they wish to be communicated with at the moment, depending on their preference or what's going on in their world. Having really strong levels of emotional intelligence. And as I've mentioned already, that ability to build relationships when you're being remote from somebody and not actually able to see them face to face. And the third bit, execution, again, something entrepreneurs are really strong on, just doing it. But within that, we're not sitting in the same office as people. We're not there physically with all of our stakeholders. So about building high levels of trust. So we trust people to get on with the job. That people, as they come back to work or as they continue working, stay motivated and they keep resilient and they are empowered as they work from home, work near home, or work flexibly to actually go and deliver what the organization needs and what we need as entrepreneurs to take our business to the next level and move successfully out of COVID-19. So I'm just interested now, as we sort of wrap up the session this morning, which I hope has been useful, if anyone would like to share maybe the next steps or the first step that they will make in the chat. What first step will you do to start returning back to work? Or is there a first step that you've already taken, something you've already done in your plans to return back to work? I'd love to hear in the chat box of what people are doing. So we've started to communicate with our team. Some of our team have been furloughed whilst people put their ideas in there. Some of our team have been furloughed. I reached out to someone this week. Explained a little bit what's been happening in the business over the last couple of weeks, and then I've said we're gonna have a meeting at the end of the month to kind of do a bit of an update. So starting keeping those communication levels, starting moving people. Took a couple of days for people to come back. One person hasn't. I think they're less looking at emails than they were when they were in business, and that's fine. But making sure that we keep the community. That's the first thing we're doing, keeping the communication levels on.
And we had a great team meeting for those of us who aren't currently furloughed the other day, and we actually had a conversation, didn't we, about what we've learned whilst in this period of return and of sustain. And that was great because it means we're not going to lose the learning that we had. Yeah.
So we've got a couple coming in, keeping communication up. Definitely, that's a really important thing. Speaking of someone in Wales, we're still limited to 5 miles, and lockdown doesn't feel to ease particularly, with little sign of easing. Well, your family is still in Wales, aren't they? Yeah. So trying to forecast the future is difficult. I'm wondering whether we're overly cautious and we're trying to forecast the impact of the second, potentially, and third waves prior to normality. I think the thing is, whatever predictions that we make now may not happen. I think what you have to do is scenario planning. Look at it. What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's the middle case scenario? And think about how that might impact on your business, on your run rate, on your cash flow, and on your investors. Another question here, using our recent 12-week experience to shape how, what, and where we do business going forward. Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about what does your organization now offer, perhaps using the OODA loop to start thinking about how you might make decisions going forward. Set up some socially distanced outdoor informal meetings to check it. That's fantastic, yeah. I hear that we'll all be able to meet in pub gardens shortly, so I would love us to have a socially distanced team meeting in the local pub here in our village. We've had a great team meeting over Zoom over the past 10 or more weeks, so we want to ensure we don't lose this and things go back to normal. Yeah, and within that, a lot of people are saying, actually, because we've seen each other's homes, we've seen each other's kitchens, we've seen each other's children's, our dogs, hierarchy, all of those old ways of working have been stripped away, and we've seen each other really humanly. As I said, as we start getting into the structures and the process and the lists and the practical side of return, keeping hold of that humanity and making sure that we use that to connect us even better and release our potential and accelerate our potential as we move to return and on to renew. So I'm going to hand back to Jo now. Thank you so much for your collaboration, for your chats, and for filling in our polls. It's been great to share this with you today. And Jo will have a chat with you then about what is our next step.
Indeed. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to contribute to the chats and respond to the polls. I really hope you found that a useful webinar. And as a follow-up to it, we're going to be sending a copy of the Leading to Return white paper, which I know Tara will be sending to you either today or tomorrow, along with a recording of this webinar. So you'll be able to watch it again. Feel free to share it. It'll be on YouTube. Sarah, I've promoted you to a panelist again. I'm not sure if you want to say any final words.
Yeah, just to back up what you said, really, we'll send out the materials after today. Once we've got everything, sometimes it takes a while for recordings to come through, so we will send them through. But yeah, thanks everyone for your engagement. It's always nice when we get a good amount of questions, and we've definitely got some more webinars coming up with Jo and Mock and Zach soon, so please keep an eye out on our newsletters and our social media. Yeah, because it's really great having all this engagement, so we want to keep the momentum going. So yeah, please do stay in touch, and thank you, Jo and Mock, again.
Thank you,
You're
Sarah.
welcome.
Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of the week, and stay safe and be strong.
Thanks everyone.